Welcome back to another edition of Workplace Q&A here on the Job Search Reality Series. This is where we take workplace situations that people are dealing with and talk about what you can actually do when you find yourself caught in the middle of one of these situations. And today's question comes from Marcus in Knoxville, Tennessee. Marcus works as an assistant manager for a retail store, and he's found himself in a pretty uncomfortable position. Here's what Marcus writes. Marcus's question is, "Hey Todd, my name is Marcus, and I'm writing from Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been an assistant manager at a retail store for a little over 2 years. Recently, our store manager has become really strict about labor hours. We're constantly being told that we're over payroll and that we need to get everyone's hours down. Here's the problem. Our store closes at 9 p.m. My manager wants almost everybody clocked out by 9:05, and there's still work that has to be done. We have to clean up the store, put merchandise back, take out trash, finish paperwork, and sometimes prepare things for the opening crew. Most nights we're probably here another 20 or 30 minutes. My manager has basically told us that everybody needs to clock out and then finish whatever needs to be finished before they leave. I've done it myself because I'm an assistant manager and I don't want to cause problems. But now one of my employees came to me and said that she doesn't think it's right that she's working without getting paid. And honestly, I think she's right. The problem is that I'm the assistant manager. I'm supposed to enforce what my manager tells me to do, but I'm also the person whose employees come to. I'm the person these employees come to when they have a problem. I don't want to get fired, but I also don't feel comfortable telling somebody to work when they're not getting paid. What would you do if you were me?" All right, well, interesting. So, Marcus, this is exactly the kind of situation that can make middle management incredibly difficult because you're caught between two responsibilities. You've got a boss telling you, control labor, but you've also got employees looking at you saying, why am I working when I'm not getting paid? And there's something important that needs to be said here. Being told to control payroll and being told to have people perform work after they clocked out are two very different things. If there's 30 minutes of work left to do, somebody has to do that work. You can't magically make the work disappear because the labor budget says everybody should have gone home. And this is where I think companies sometimes create their own problems. They give managers unrealistic labor expectations, and then somewhere down the chain, somebody starts cutting corners trying to meet those expectations. Maybe corporate says, reduce overtime. The district manager says, cut labor. The store manager says, get everybody off the clock. And eventually an hourly employee is standing there working without getting paid. That's a problem. But Marcus has another issue. He's an assistant manager. So what happens when your boss tells you to enforce something that you don't believe you should be enforcing? First, I would start documenting what's happening. Not because you're trying to start a war with your employer. You're protecting yourself. Write down the dates. Write down approximately how long employees are working after clocking out. And document any instructions you're being given regarding employees continuing to work after they're clocked out. Because if this situation eventually becomes a bigger issue, Marcus doesn't want somebody turning around and saying, Marcus was the assistant manager. He was the one making everybody work off the clock. Especially if those instructions were actually coming from somebody above him. And they will sell you out, believe me. Second, I would have a professional conversation with the store manager. And I wouldn't go into that conversation looking for a fight. I'd say something like, I'm concerned about employees continuing to perform work after they're clocked out. If we're supposed to have everyone clocked out by 9:05, I think we need to figure out how we're going to get the closing responsibilities completed before then. Notice what Marcus isn't saying. He's not saying, you're a terrible manager. He's saying, we have a problem. How are we going to solve it? Maybe the answer is that closing duties start earlier. Maybe schedules need to change. Maybe fewer tasks need to be completed at night. Or maybe the company needs to accept that closing the store requires another 20 minutes of labor and they need to pay you for it. But whatever the solution is, asking employees to donate their time shouldn't be the solution. And Marcus, there's one other thing I think you need to remember. The employee who came to you trusted you enough to say something. That's actually important because employees don't always tell management when something is bothering them. Sometimes they just quit. Sometimes they stop caring. Sometimes they start looking for another job. And sometimes the first time upper management hears about the problem is when it has already become a much bigger issue. So I wouldn't punish that employee for bringing this to you. I would listen. All right, so here's my take on this one. One of the hardest places to be in any company is middle management. That's where I was when I was working in my previous position. You're responsible for enforcing decisions you don't necessarily make. Upper management wants results. Employees want fairness. And somehow you're supposed to keep everybody happy. You can't always do that. But I believe there comes a point where being a good manager means being willing to tell the people above you, we've got a problem. That doesn't mean you become disrespectful. That doesn't mean that you refuse every instruction that you disagree with. But your title doesn't eliminate your judgment. And if the only way your department can hit its labor numbers is by having employees continue working after they're off the clock, then maybe the labor numbers aren't telling the whole story. Marcus also needs to protect himself because if this blows up 6 months from now, everybody involved may suddenly have a very different memory of who told whom to do what. That's why documentation matters. And here's the bigger workplace lesson. A good manager doesn't just represent the company to the employees. Sometimes a good manager has to represent the employees to the company. Marcus may be the only person standing between these workers and somebody several levels above them who has absolutely no idea this is even happening. So Marcus from Knoxville, Tennessee, thank you for today's workplace Q&A. And I want to throw this question out to everybody watching or listening. What would you do if your boss told you to enforce a workplace policy that you believe was wrong? Would you follow the instruction because they're your boss? Would you push back? Would you go to HR? Or would you start looking for another job? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've got a workplace situation you'd like to discuss, send it to the Job Search Reality Series email address, which is jobsearchreality@gmail.com. Your question could be featured in a future edition of Workplace Q&A. I'm Philip Todd Brooks, and this is the Job Search Reality Series, because sometimes the hardest part of having a job isn't doing the work. It's figuring out what to do when the workplace itself becomes the problem.